Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Get Brant's Rants. So I just wanted to talk a little bit today. Unfortunately, I'm trying to find ways. There's a lot to be angry about, but I think that right now, especially while we are still in the midst of the pandemic, it's hard to be able to kind of find ways to unleash our anger. So I'm trying to find ways to be hopeful. So first, I guess I'll start with kind of the bad news, which is that we still haven't hit a peak on coronavirus cases yet. I don't think we're gonna hit a peak anytime soon because of the fact that we still have states that aren't even complying with, just social distancing, like basic stuff. So that's going to continue causing the spread to escalate. Um, and we also have a number of situations that are really problematic. So this whole ventilator issue, where New York asked for like 30,000 or 40,000 ventilators, and they got 400. Think about that in terms of if there's 1 week that people need to be on a ventilator, because that's just what they need while they're infected. Uh, Over 20,000 people at a time won't have access to it. That's people die. People will die as a result of that. And the guy at the top doesn't care because all he cares about is his ego and the fact that the governor of New York has not spent all of his time just kissing his butt. So that's a problem. Michigan is going to be a disaster. Flint, Michigan especially, is already in, like, they don't have access to water or anything else, and now they're also not going to get medical supplies. This is, I don't want to say the word genocide with regard to this, but really. Now, on the topic of genocide, though, all of the detention facilities, and that includes our private prisons, which are predominantly black populations, and also these detention centers that are predominantly Latin American people. There is no social distancing in these prisons or detention centers. There are not the medical treatment. And nobody, right now, even before coronavirus even came about, these detention facilities, when people were getting sick, they were not getting care. And so that means that's how people have died already. So within the next couple of days, now that, they've got confirmed coronavirus cases in these detention centers, we're going to start seeing large-scale casualties. And it's sad, depressing, and infuriating all at the same time. I still want to, encourage people to keep, pushing. Push your Congress people. Push your elected representatives. I'd say push back on the executive branch. I don't think there's anything anybody can say. Unless actual, there was a big change, like sea change in terms of how, the core of the Trump supporters might actually and honestly, what's going to need to happen for that is that all of these white rural communities that are Trump's base are going to get hit hard with it, and people are going to die. And once people's family members are dead, that's when they're going to say, "Oh my God, he lied to us! I can't believe he lied to us." the hopeful thing is a lot of people are gonna wake up. A lot of people aren't. I mean, a lot of people, no matter what happens. I mean, it's the whole thing with, again, I'm very anti-religious, and I don't want any religious people to take this as a direct insult, but depending upon how literal you take your religious beliefs, the Catholic Church, for example, historically, was lying to a lot of people. And in fact, a lot of the members of the Catholic Church, the leadership, would lie to people about what the Bible even said to suit their own needs. And so, and yet the Catholic Church still exists. So are there going to be people who are going to, they decided they're going to believe Trump no matter what reality says, I don't want to talk about him. In terms of the stimulus package, which is atrocious, very little to help real people. I'm glad there's something in there for real people. If it wasn't for Bernie Sanders, none of it would have happened. I will at least give him that, and a lot of people are like, oh, how did he even vote for it anyway? When I don't think people understand. Like, one senator can't change all of Congress. All of Congress is doing one particular thing. And the fact that, people like Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham were very against the unemployment expansion and everything else, and all of that, like, if it wasn't for the fighting, that never would have happened. And, I've seen some of the interviews and everything else. I'm frustrated in general. I watched an interview with Rachel Maddow interviewing Nancy Pelosi, and there's just no accountability. And that's a shame, and I'm going to say, LGBT person to LGBT person, I am ashamed of you, Rachel Maddow. You're supposed to be a journalist. But anyway, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who I am constantly still impressed by. I really loved her speech. I'm actually going to make sure that I link that in the video. In fact, I'll let you all kind of see that here. And we'll basically go with that because I think she hit the nail on the head. And some of her speech, there's stuff that she said outright, and then there's the stuff that she implied without actually saying outright. But I'll let you take a look at that.
I represent one of the hardest hit communities in the hardest hit city in this country, Queens, New York. 13 dead in a night in Elmhurst Hospital alone. Our community's reality is this country's future if we don't do anything. Hospital workers do not have protective equipment. We don't have the necessary ventilators, but we have to go into this vote eyes wide open. What did the Senate majority fight for? One of the largest corporate bailouts with as few strings as possible in American history. Shameful. The greed of that fight is wrong for crumbs, for our families. And the option that we have is to either let them suffer with nothing or to allow this greed and billions of dollars, which will be leveraged into trillions of dollars, to contribute to the largest income inequality gap in our future. There should be shame about what was fought for in this bill and the choices that we have to make.
Gentlelady's time's expired.
And so basically, obviously she said that, this is something that, people are put into a bad choice, and that most of this bill is terrible. It's terrible. It's giving even more power to these corporations. And as much as I have friends who are, those constant like Republican / libertarian friends who are like, oh my God, there's so much socialism. We don't want more power in the federal government. And in the meantime, they don't at all think about how much power these corporations have. And, this is part of the thing. And so to my kind of Democrat-leaning friends, here's the problem with the Democratic Party, is the fact that you have, people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and all these, who progressives deem as the establishment Democrats. And, most of you don't understand why we hate them so much. Because we do. I mean, I'm not going to pretend we don't fucking hate them. Oh, sorry, I swore. I might cut that out later. I'll see if I can. But anyway, the problem is, and this is why a lot of business owners hate Democrats, and how the Democratic Party has alienated the people who are supposed to be its base. Because small business owners should be the base of the Democratic Party, and they're not. And the reason is that all of these, over the course of like the last 30 years, whenever Democrats have actually taken a firm stand and put in regulations on business practices, especially for things like anti-discrimination and things like that, they always hit small businesses harder than they hit large corporations. And in fact, large corporations, like businesses over a certain amount, and this is the case with this stimulus package, corporations over a certain number of employees or a certain number of dollars or whatever are exempt from all of the regulations. So where does the bulk of all the regulations hit? It hits middle-class America. Middle-class America being the small business owners who hire a few people, like, again, it's a small business. They're the ones who have to follow all the rules, while these large corporations, which are able to undercut pricing and everything else because they don't have to follow them, and because they have more resources. So, for example, like Amazon, like Home Depot, where I worked, I mean, the whole point was that they would find certain products that they would be willing to lose money on in order to gain market share and market control. And once these corporations gain market control, they get to define everything, and that's why, again, I'm going to go back to Home Depot. All of, customers and everybody else get frustrated, especially, again, the small businesses, because Home Depot opened up all the pro desks and everything else so that contractors would actually get better deals. Well, so first of all, contractors alone, even if it is a small business, still get better deals than the consumer. So the consumer always inevitably gets hit the hardest and the worst. The small business owners get small discounts and stuff like that because of whatever. And the larger the corporation, the larger the business, the more and better deals that they were able to get through our pro desks. So it's all class warfare. And one of the best things, from, this is like probably like, I think 20 years ago, Barbara Ehrenreich wrote a book called Nickel and Dimed. And I think if anybody wants to check that book out, again, it's like 20 years old. It's there's probably better books out there, but for me, the things that kind of opened my mind to these processes, the fact is that it is more expensive in America to be poor than it is to be working class. It is actually costs you more money to be poor and survive than it does to be working class and survive. And then it is more expensive to be working class and survive than it is to be middle class and survive. And then it's cheaper to or it's more expensive to be middle class and survive than it is to be rich and survive. Because rich people get deals and everybody kisses their butts and they give them deals or they give them away free stuff and everything else, because everybody's always thinking, if I do them a favor now, they'll do me a favor later. And rich people don't. They never do. They never, ever, ever do anything just for other people. That's why they're rich. That's how they got rich. They accumulate wealth at the expense of others. If you think about the global economy as one big market share, that's what competition is. So if there's a concentration of wealth, that means, the wealth doesn't come from nowhere. There's not an unlimited number of US dollars in existence, and we could get into that because, there could be, based upon the Fed and everything else, and the fact that the US dollar isn't tied to anything other than the Fed, and so that actually is something, scary. And I think, the libertarian movement, once upon a time, actually cared about that. The libertarian movement, when it was principled, because there's no principled libertarians ever anymore. They don't exist. They're all Republican toadies. All of them. There's probably some libertarians who are Democrats now, maybe. But no. The whole thing being, hey, I like in principle the idea that the federal government should balance its own budget. The federal government and even state governments shouldn't be operating on a deficit constantly. I actually agree with that philosophically. But that's part of the reason why I think the cuts don't come from social services. The cuts don't come from, and this is where I'll say the socialist in me says there's a minimum standard for everybody. You have to have a minimum standard. Civil society, government exists. And it exists for a reason. It means, and so, in my opinion, the role of the federal government, or government in general, and civil society in general, is make sure everybody is able to meet a certain minimum standard of living. So, again, you go to human rights and economic and social rights particularly talk about, everybody needs food, everybody needs housing, everybody needs access to clean water, everybody needs access to healthcare, everybody needs access to education, and in most economic, social, human rights stuff, they'll talk about everybody needs to be able to get a job. My personal belief with regard to a job is, again, this is me being a philosophy person. It's about everybody needs to be able to have some sort of sense of purpose in their life. Everybody lives, everybody dies. What happens in the middle is the important part. Everybody, what you do has to matter. So what you do has to matter. It means that you have to have dignity in your job. So, again, with a lot of workers where people are talking about unskilled labor, and American consumerism, especially, again, having worked at Home Depot, having been customer service on a phone for Verizon and everything else, people are rude, people are mean, people do not treat workers with respect, and in fact, it is a reality that the wealthier somebody is, the more entitled they are to feeling like they can mistreat workers because they're giving them money. It's they feel like they're paying money to be able to abuse people. And that's a problem. That's a cultural problem in America that we have that goes entirely unaddressed. And it's because there's no dignity in work anymore. That's one of the things that I decry. And that's actually part of my argument, my philosophical argument against universal basic income is it may provide for some of those other benefits, the housing, everything else. It does not provide for dignity of work, because with just universal basic income, there's always that argument that people make in general. I mean, the American people are atrocious on this, and again, I know most of my audience, all of my audience are Americans, and I'm sorry to tell you that you're awful people, but we kind of are. We don't treat people well in general, and that's part of what makes us human, and that's where I get very concerned with regard to socialization. Is the more and more we socialize ourselves in ways where we are detracting from everybody else, and we're attacking, I call it horizontal hostility. We don't punch up. Hey, if we all just punched up all the time, hey, punch away. We don't. We punch down. As a general rule, humanity in general, not just Americans, humanity in general, we tend to punch down. We're supposed to be punching up. It's the only way to get real change, systemic change. It's the only way to get a more egalitarian society. I'm not saying don't punch. Punch up. Anyway. So back to... I'm sorry, I got off topic a little bit. I do that. That's why it's called Brandt's Rants, not Brandt's well-structured arguments. But anyway, back to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. What she didn't say is basically the progressives and the working people, the people representing the working people, who actually know who they're supposed to be representing and actually take the effort to fulfill their responsibilities in representing them. What Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has strongly implied but didn't say outright, is they're hostages. We had to, the only way to get even the small checks to American people was to sign off on this bill that did all of this other stuff that isn't helping anybody. It's not. It's not helping anybody except for the airline industry, and whenever I say industry, because we have this thing in the United States, and this is part of the propagandistic nature of our media, is that we all talk about it in terms of those things, that we talk about an industry and we think that implies the workers, and it doesn't. It doesn't at all. Or unions. Those few industries where unions are still in place, the unions have very little power in the negotiation. In addition to that, the workers are alienated from union leadership, and you saw this in the Nevada primary, where there was that one particular union where the union leadership was trying to tell everybody to vote for Joe Biden, and all of the actual union members ended up voting for Bernie Sanders. And that should tell somebody something. In fact, actually, this is what I think is part of the main problem whenever people talk about, communism, and how it always goes to this authoritarian thing. It's like, it's because if you have unions kind of taking the place, and so it's the difference between communism and capitalism is that in capitalism, corporations and oligarchs, or the corporate elite, are the ones who have control over industry. They control the means of production. In communism, it's the unions that do. The thing where legitimately, it's a legitimate criticism of communist governments whether it's Russia or the USSR or China or Cuba or anything else. The problem is that union leadership rather than the workers. So the workers are still silenced. Labor is still silenced and controlled. And that's the problem. That as long as the workers themselves, the people doing the actual labor that's creating the value of whatever the service, product, whatever it is, the people doing the work, if they don't have power over how they do the work, when they do the work, what compensation they get for the work that they do, if there's none of that they have control over, that's a problem. I mean, that gets back towards that authoritarian, feudal kind of system. The point is, everybody should always be able, and this is where I get, more anarchistic in my thoughts and beliefs, is that no matter what, every single person, you do what's right at the moment. You do what's right, period. Because everybody's responsible for your own actions. It doesn't matter if you were ordered by the government to do something terrible. It doesn't matter if you were told by your corporate boss to do something terrible. It doesn't matter if your union leader tells you to do something terrible. You don't do terrible things. You do the right thing no matter what, whether somebody tells you to do the wrong thing or not. I mean, again, my big thing with regard to the fact that, I mean, the similarities between Donald Trump and Mussolini are way higher than I wish they were. It makes it really easy to make comparisons, but I don't like talking about him. I'm going to change topic again. So anyway, sorry. Getting lost and losing track of myself again. Finding hope. If you're angry, make note of it. Remember. Because, once all of this is over, and this is what I hope, because the United States has never really done any sort of large-scale strike or work stoppage. As Americans, we tend to be very anti-protest. We need to, as soon as we're able to safely start leaving our homes in large numbers, rather than just running straight to work as soon as we possibly can, I hope we're taking to the streets first. Remember this. Remember it. Take to the streets first. There's going to be a lot of issues. Renters and landlords and everything else. There's going to be a lot of people that landlords are going to try starting to throw people out on the street in large scale. Our unemployment rate has topped the Great Depression. Everybody's still on the news, still talking about, oh no, are we going to go into a recession? No, we're going to go into a depression, not a recession. I'd argue we're already there. It's just that the way our economic system is structured is that it's covering up the fact that we've already been in a depression for several years. It's just... Anyway. So yeah. I hope people take to the streets as soon as we're able to get out of our homes and take to the streets. and not in the process of being thrown out into the street. So that's the thing with these landlords is they're gonna start trying to throw people out in large numbers, and we need to resist. And in fact, I mean, this is an industry that really needs to have a lot of reform done on it. It's just a reality. It shouldn't be a job to own property and charge people to live in it. That's not a job. And yet, that is a large section of our economy. And so, and that's not to say that landlords, can't be good, that there's no good landlords or anything like that. They're just rare. Or they're rare because they can't compete with all the really bad ones. Because the really bad ones are the ones who are able to make themselves more competitive by pushing everybody else out of the market. That's why slumlords are such a big problem in America, and it's a large unaddressed problem thus far. And that's the thing. I mean, anything that is an unaddressed problem in America, we can fix if we actually fix it, and that's the problem. So anyway, so my point of hope is, even though the next few days especially are going to be really hard, this is where I think the next week is when most people are going to end up actually passing because of the coronavirus. There's going to be a lot of people who are very upset. You have every right to be. There's going to be a lot of mourning that we're going to have to do, and we're going to need to do that. But we need to take to the streets. We need to clean up. We say Washington. I hate saying clean up Washington, especially, part of this whole stimulus package is, I don't know if people know, but they deliberately labeled D.C. as a territory in order to give D.C. residents less money and give Washington, D.C. Itself less money as part of the stimulus package. So the District of Columbia is getting less than states that have lower populations than the District of Columbia. And that should be a huge red flag for people. It's not usually, because everybody thinks of Washington as the leadership and the coastal elites and everything else. Washington, D.C. is a predominantly black city, and it's poor. All of the people that you think are all of the Washington insiders and elites who are in control of everything, they go to Northern Virginia. They go to the Rayburn office building and whatever, and then they go back to Northern Virginia. That's where they all live and stay. Not in D.C. I mean, some of them. Again, depend upon. But for the most part, Washington, D.C. is a very poor, very heavily black population that does not get the resources that it needs, specifically because Congress controls it, and they look down on them. It's point blank. So anyway, clean up government. So rather than clean up Washington, clean up government, and be ready to take to the streets once we're done with this. I guess that's the bottom line. Thanks again. I hope you like and subscribe to get Brandt's Rants, and I'll see you next time.